It was sometime in the 1990s. My father was at work in Seattle, sitting at his desk and finishing some reports. Everything was quiet until the office phone rang. "Hello," he answered. On the other end, the guard from the security desk said, "Sir, there's a lady here who says she is your old classmate. She's waiting for you at the gate." My father was surprised. An old classmate? Who could that be? He quickly went downstairs to check. At the entrance, he saw a woman in her 40s, smiling and waving as if they were close friends. "Hello, do you remember me? We went to the same university," she said happily. My father looked at her closely. Yes, he remembered her face. But the truth was, back in college, they had barely spoken. They were not friends, just classmates. He was confused. Why had she come to see him after so many years? After some polite greetings, the real reason appeared. She explained that she was on a business trip in Seattle and didn't want to pay for a hotel. Instead, she wanted to stay at his house for 2 nights. But she had another plan too. She would still get a hotel receipt, submit it to her company, and keep the travel allowance for herself. She even said proudly, "When I travel, I always stay with college friends. They take care of me, food, lodging, even sightseeing." Inside, my father thought, "Oh no, my wife will not agree to this." But my father had a weakness. He was proud and didn't like to say no. He worried that if he refused, people would think he was stingy. After hesitating, he nodded and said, "All right, come with me." That one decision would cause a very uncomfortable evening. That evening, my father arrived home with the guest. My mother had just finished her long day at work. She walked into the house carrying her bag, expecting a quiet dinner with her family. But when she opened the door, she saw a stranger sitting on the sofa. The woman stood up quickly and smiled politely. "Hello, I'm your husband's old classmate from university," she said cheerfully. My mother froze for a moment. She was polite, but inside, she was furious. "What is this? Why didn't he tell me?" After my father explained the situation, my mother smiled stiffly and said, "Oh, I see. Welcome." She didn't want to embarrass the guest, but her heart was boiling. While they ate dinner, the woman acted like she was part of the family. She told stories about her travels and laughed loudly. She even hinted that she expected them to take her sightseeing the next day. My father tried to keep the conversation light, but he was nervous. He knew his wife was angry. He could see it in the way she stayed quiet and pushed her food around her plate. Finally, after dinner, my mother excused herself and said, "I'll wash the dishes." She smiled politely, but her mind was already working on a plan. She couldn't kick the guest out directly. It would seem rude, but she also refused to let this woman sleep comfortably in their home. She thought, if my husband is too weak to say no, then I will find another way. Meanwhile, my father sat with the guest in the living room, watching TV. He tried to relax, but his stomach felt tight. He knew something was coming. His wife was not the kind of woman to let this pass quietly. And he was right. That night, my mother would show just how clever she could be. After dinner, my mother dried her hands and walked back into the living room. She smiled politely and said, "You two relax and watch some TV. I feel a little tired, so I'll go to bed early." The guest waved kindly. "Of course, you must rest after a long day of work," she said. But my mother wasn't really tired. She was preparing her trick. Our home only had 2 beds, a big double bed in my parents' room and a smaller single bed in my room. At that time, I was staying with my grandparents during the week, so normally the guest would have slept in my bed. My father was already planning this in his mind. He thought, "Yes, that will be fine. She can use my child's bed, and everything will be simple." But my mother had another idea. Quietly, while they were still watching TV, she went straight to my small bedroom. She pulled the blanket up, lay down, and closed her eyes. Soon, when my father peeked in, he saw her lying there, already pretending to be fast asleep. His face turned pale. "Honey, what are you doing? Please, get up. That bed is for the guest," he whispered. But my mother didn't move. She didn't even open her eyes. She breathed slowly and evenly, like someone in deep sleep. He shook her shoulder gently. "Please, I'm begging you. Don't do this now." Still, she didn't respond. She acted perfectly, as if waking her up was impossible. My father felt trapped. There was no way he could force her to move without making a big scene in front of the guest. And now, the problem was clear. With my mother occupying the single bed, the only one left in the entire house was the double bed in the parents' bedroom. My father began to panic. He knew exactly what his wife was doing. She was pushing the problem back to him, and he also knew she would not back down. My father stood in the hallway, frozen. He looked at his wife lying in the single bed, pretending to sleep, and then glanced nervously toward the living room, where the guest was waiting. His heart pounded. "What do I do now?" he thought. "If she sleeps in our double bed, my wife will be furious. If I tell the guest to leave, I will look rude." He walked back into the living room and forced a smile. "Well, about sleeping arrangements," he began carefully. The guest interrupted happily. "Oh, don't worry. I'm sure it will be fine. I'm not picky." She had no idea what was going on. She thought she would be given the single bed in my room. My father wiped his forehead. He could feel sweat forming. "Actually, my wife is not feeling well. She went to bed early," he explained. The guest looked surprised. "Oh dear, I hope it's nothing serious." My father nodded quickly. Yes. She just needs rest." He stood there awkwardly, searching for the right words. He wanted to find a way to move the guest without making her upset. His pride was strong. He hated looking unfriendly. But at the same time, he was terrified of his wife's silent anger. Inside the bedroom, my mother listened carefully. She could hear his nervous voice. She almost smiled under the blanket. "Yes, let's see how you fix this now," she thought. Back in the living room, the silence grew heavy. The guest waited for my father to show her to a bed. My father cleared his throat, coughed, and finally blurted out, Maybe it's better if you don't stay here tonight. My wife might be sick, and I don't want you to catch anything." The guest blinked in surprise. "Oh, really?" My father nodded firmly, gaining courage. "Yes, really. Let me take you to a hotel instead. It's safer." He grabbed her travel bag before she could argue. His face was red, but his decision was final. The guest looked shocked when my father picked up her bag. She had been so sure she would stay at our house, enjoy free meals, and save her travel money. For a moment, she tried to protest. "Oh, but really, it's no trouble," she said quickly. "I don't mind if your wife is sick. I can take care of myself." But my father didn't slow down. He was already walking toward the door with her bag in his hand. No, I insist. I cannot risk you catching anything. It wouldn't be good for your work," he said firmly, though his voice shook a little. The guest followed him reluctantly. She kept trying to smile, but her face looked stiff now. She clearly didn't expect this answer. When they arrived at the nearest hotel, my father went straight to the reception desk. The guest stood behind him, embarrassed, while he spoke loudly to the receptionist. "Please choose a very nice room for her," he said. "It will be covered by her company anyway." The receptionist nodded politely. The guest tried to interrupt. "Oh, actually," but my father didn't let her finish. He quickly handed the receptionist her ID and said again, "Yes, make sure it's comfortable. She's here on business, after all." The guest looked annoyed, but she couldn't say much in front of strangers. Finally, she accepted the room key. My father smiled, forced but polite. Well then, have a good night. I'm sure you'll rest better here than at our house. Before she could answer, he gave a quick bow and almost ran out the door. On the way home, his heart was still racing. He thought about his wife lying silently in the single bed, refusing to move. He sighed deeply. She's clever, too clever. I should have known she would handle this in her own way. When he opened the front door again, the house was quiet. His wife was still sleeping. My father whispered softly, "You win." Many years passed after that strange night. My parents rarely spoke about it. My father was embarrassed, and my mother felt she had already made her point. The guest never returned, and life went back to normal. Then, in 2018, my father was invited to a big class reunion. At first, he wasn't sure if he should go. Memories of that troublesome classmate still made him uncomfortable. But curiosity won, and he decided to attend. The reunion was held in a large restaurant. Old friends laughed, shared stories, and looked through photo albums from their youth. Everyone was happy to see each other again after so many years. But my father noticed something quickly. The troublesome woman was not there. Later that evening, the conversation turned into gossip. Someone whispered, "Do you know what happened to her?" Another person added, "Yes, I heard she spent years traveling around, staying at classmates' homes, always making trouble. Apparently, she had become famous in their circle. No matter where people moved, she somehow found their addresses and phone numbers. She stayed with them, ate their food, and sometimes even caused fights between husbands and wives. Some families were left angry and broken because of her visits." My father listened carefully. Finally, one classmate said, "You're lucky she only came to Seattle once." My father nodded quickly. "Yes, I was very lucky." But then another classmate laughed and said, "No, that's not the reason. She actually hates Seattle the most. She always says people from Seattle are fake and selfish, and she never wants to go back for the rest of her life." The whole table burst out laughing. My father couldn't help but smile. He realized that, in the end, his wife's clever trick had worked perfectly. Not only did the woman leave that night, but she also never returned and never wanted to. When he came home from the reunion, my father told the story to my mother. She just smiled calmly and said, "Sometimes, the best way to fight trouble is not with anger, but with a clever plan."